Well, how's everyone doing? We're doing this video much too late. In fact, the Bahrain Grand Prix of the 2024 season has already started, but I figured I still absolutely want to release this video. It's one that I look forward to putting out, and I feel like I get a lot of fun comments out of it, a lot of interaction. But before we get into it, I do want to say, if you can, please just give this video a like, give me a subscribe, follow that Twitch page that's down there. I'm gonna link it, I'm sure, up in the corner up over there. But yes, please just give me a follow. Let me know what you think. I really genuinely appreciate all of the feedback. And yeah, let's get into this. So we are doing my F1 2023 power rankings. The reason why I'm so delayed on this is because mental health. It's a very big factor. Everyone should take it very seriously. I did not do a lot of the normal work that I like to do for each Grand Prix when I'm putting factors into this. Every single race weekend, I put about 2 to 3 hours into factoring out my rankings. So I might start doing them individually, showing kind of individual rankings. Maybe I'll start with Bahrain. Maybe I'll release that tomorrow. Who knows? I have a lot that I need to get done today, but we'll see about doing that. Maybe doing some more weekly videos, being a lot more involved on the YouTube side of things. But yeah, that's why it took me so long, is because I wanted to make sure that if I was putting this video out, I was doing it justice. I wanted to make sure all of my rankings, I had justifiable reasons to back it up. I didn't want to just put it in because this driver felt like they fit here, etc., etc. So let's get into it. As always, we're going to show kind of the table. I'm going to do 22 drivers this year. I will account for Ricciardo. I will account for De Vries. I will account for Lawson. In the previous times, I didn't always put in drivers who did like a single race, like De Vries in 2022, or Hulkenberg, who I believe also did a race at one point, etc. But yeah, I do use other drivers as factors to really space out things, such as like those who did practice sessions, Robert Schwartzman, Felipe Drugovich, etc. They do get taken into account. But yeah, so this is the list. We're going to have 22 drivers. I'm going to have, as much as I'll have the rankings obviously in the big black squares that have the numbers in them, in this little green box, as always, I will have my rating for the driver. So you might see some drivers where it's just like, oh, this driver could have been arguably better than the other one, where you might very well see in the ratings, I had them very similar to each other. There's definitely clearly groupings, such as I have pointed out in the color fields above me. If their ratings between a 1 and 5, they definitely were a championship contender. Between a 5 and 10, they're probably one of the elite drivers in the field this season. 10 to 15, midfield. 15 to 18, if they're a rookie, if they're a rookie or it's first year within a team, I'll give them some grace. Give them some exception, but they need to improve if they need to stay within the sport, or like not lose a seat in general. If their rating was an 18 or lower, they need to go. They need to go. Their time is done. That's simple. Okay. I believe I will actually no, we don't start yet. We go through the factors of how I score this. So we've got like an average qualifying position, as well as like that. Like we rank it average finishing position. We rank it finishing position versus expected finishing position, which is something part of the reason why it takes me so long to do each Grand Prix, because I factor in so many different things, like historical, track history, like as far as that driver, as far as that team has done at that track in the past, as well as throughout the season, etc. So to factor for different things, as well as, of course, you add in practice factors, qualifying, etc., to come up with expected finishing positions. And then we've got we combine everything into averages. So yeah, qualifying pace, race pace. I do analyze the race pace. Another one of the things that takes me a very long time to properly analyze, and we combine those. And then we take into, of course, just a lot simple, more point scoring, which obviously puts drivers that are higher in the standings higher, but that's why we also have to factor in those other things like expected positions. Otherwise, Sergio Perez would be P2 in these rankings, but he obviously wasn't the second best driver of the year. And I just realized that this sheet says 2022 on it. I never updated that. Let's go ahead and ignore that. But yeah, I also do factor in teammates against each other in this one compared to in F2 and F3 I do not, since those ones are spec series. As much as obviously some teams are better than others on it, it's a lot more difficult to measure compared to F1, where it's obviously not a spec series. Each team has the same cars each weekend to a degree. And so I compare teammates against each other. And just to go through all of the other stuff that's over to this side right here. So yeah, any DNF for the drivers was deemed not at fault due to reliability issues or someone else taking them out, or if they get like disqualified for, like, example, looking at Lewis Hamilton and Coda. I'm not counting him as like having a bad race or using his performance at all because in those factors, because one, I can't really factor in him having a good performance because his car was technically illegal. At the same time, I can't fault him because it's not his fault the car was illegal. So yeah, so that actually goes into the next point based on the same factors. Any DNF for the driver was at fault and took themselves out of qualifying or the race was recognized as an automatic P20 in that session. So for example, I'm trying to think of drivers who like crashed mid-race or in qualifying. I'm just going to throw out Logan Sergeant because he crashed all the time. It doesn't matter if he would have gotten himself into Q2. Actually, no, that's a bad example. If he got himself into Q2, I would have counted that as a P15. But if a driver was about P10 in the... George Russell is a good example. George Russell in Singapore. George Russell crashed himself out of the Singapore race. That's an automatic P20. It was his fault. It wasn't his team's fault. It was no one else's fault except for his. That's an automatic P20 because it's his fault that he had a DNF. And then sessions where the driver did have a DNF, comparisons were made with their teammate or representative rival if both teammates didn't complete that session to come up with a value using dry sessions where both drivers being measured finished that session. And then practice times of every driver were recorded to further split the field apart, such as factoring in drivers like Drugovich, Behrman, etc., how they did those two sessions. It helps me to further divvy it up a little bit because we don't want everyone too close together. We want some separation in the field. It makes things a bit easier to rank out. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the rankings, starting at the bottom. Now, based off of the start of the season, I know who a lot of people might think is at the bottom, but that's not the case. At the bottom, I put Logan Sergeant, and I'm just going to point it out right away. Some of the drivers, their photos above me. Oh crap, I didn't update this. I'm going to have to start this over. So, I'm going to take a little bit of a pause. You might see a bit of an awkward split here because I've got this field right here that's filled with a bunch of stats. I just realized I only updated it for about half of the field, so I need to go ahead and update that. I will be back. Okay, and I'm back. Continuing off where I left off, now I've got these little bit of stats up above me just to kind of go along with. I won't necessarily point them out, but one of the things I didn't point out is I have over here, I don't know if my mouse isn't very too visible. I've got two little boxes beside the rating that I've generated. The top one is my preseason prediction. That was for the standings, not necessarily a power ranking, and the one underneath of it was my mid-season power ranking. I didn't actually put out a video for that one. Again, my mental health got the better of me, and I was not in a good place, didn't have a lot of time and availability to complete it, so I didn't end up doing that video. But I did actually generate my mid-season power rankings. I did have them all together. I just never put out the video. So I'll go over all of this. So yeah, Logan Sergeant at the beginning of the season, I kind of figured he would finish at the very bottom. That didn't change at the mid-season, at which time I was still only ranking 20 drivers. Daniel Ricciardo had basically just been announced and only done one race. There wasn't really enough to justify putting him in the mid-season rankings as of yet. And so yeah, Logan Sergeant I've had consistently as my worst driver in the field. He is too crash happy, and while I think there is potential for him, I do really like him. His junior career is fantastic, and I can understand 100% why he's being given another shot. But when you put it very plainly, he had an awful season. An absolutely awful season that I can't really justify. Like, putting him anywhere other than P22. Sorry, P22. I forgot that I have 22 drivers here myself. In P21, that's where I put Nick DeVries. So you can see based off of the rating, I had DeVries almost a whole 2 points higher than Sargent. I think DeVries is a good driver. I don't necessarily think he should have kept his seat beyond this season, but I think it was much too early, at least as of that point, to justify getting rid of him. 11 races is not enough time. I don't even necessarily think at that moment he was getting necessarily outperformed by Yuki. Yes, Yuki was absolutely outperforming him, but it was 11 races time and he was just coming in his rookie year. Yuki's been given so many opportunities, and it looks like he's almost going to be using up another one of those with the way he was acting on the radio after this last race. I don't get why Nick was given literally 0 opportunities, other than the fact that Christian Horner had a soft spot for Daniel Ricciardo and wanted to get him back into a seat. That's the only possible reason. I think if Daniel Ricciardo was racing off at another team, DeVries would have finished that year out 100%. Like, 100%. Like, I could understand if they were maybe looking at Liam Lawson, but no. Because, like, there's not a chance they were looking at someone like Iwasa, at that time Fittipaldi, trying to think of who all the Red Bull juniors are, Crawford, Hadjar. None of those guys were being considered. Maybe Lawson, but he really only got his shot because of Ricciardo's injury. I don't think he was being taken that seriously as of the time that DeVries was fired. So I think there's hope for him. He'll have success in his other series, such as he's already doing at least decent in WEC. I think he got pole position this last week there. And his highlight, like his seasonal highlight, was at Monaco. One of the hardest tracks, like, of the entire calendar, and he just barely missed Q3. I think he deserved more time, 100%. B20, I put Kevin Magnussen after coming back the previous year. This year was an extremely bad year for him. I'm honestly a little bit surprised that he kind of kept his job. Like, don't get me wrong, it's Haas, they're a bad car, but he did bad in a bad car at the same time. Like, I know they weren't good in race pace, but the fact that he was getting so over the top dominated, at least in qualifying, by Nico, it wasn't a good look for him. I'm shocked he's back, but I think that was the fact that his contract had an automatic clause to run into this season from the year before. In P19, I put Zhou Guanyu. I was expecting a little bit more of a step up in what was I think it was his second season. I was expecting a bit more of a step up. I felt like in his rookie year, I don't think he outperformed Bottas, but there was definitely races where he brings it against Bottas, but I didn't notice that this year, like, at all. It always felt like he was kind of like settling into that second fiddle role, and in a team that's a back marker, that's not good. That's really not good at all. I don't think he's a bad driver, but he, like, to me, this next year, if he doesn't, like, pull out some amazing performances, it's time to go. In P18, I put Liam Lawson. Granted, yeah, it's kind of low, but at the same time, he never really had too much of a chance to prove himself, and he did do a decent job. Like, to be fair, like, he did a very good job. I don't think he necessarily outperformed Yuki, like Drive to Survive made it out to look like, but he did do a fantastic job, and in those races that they were together, Liam Neeson, I'm confusing Liam Neeson and Liam Lawson. Liam Lawson was the only driver of those two to score points. Granted, I believe, at least that's not partially Yuki's fault. He got taken out in the one race, and I can't remember. There was one other race where he had a DNF or did not start or something like that. That wasn't his fault. But yeah, Liam did a fantastic job in his short stint as a reserve. I definitely hope he gets an opportunity in the future for next season. Like, I have to imagine one of Yuki or Daniel is not going to get a seat next year, at least within that team. So I'd have to imagine Liam will be getting a chance, hopefully, with the RB team next year. I really want to see him. I want to see Liam get given a chance. He's a fantastic talent. In P17, I put Lance Stroll. He had some moments of brilliance, like especially at the beginning of the season, but part of that could be because Aston was just right at the top of their game. He came back and got I think he was P6 on the grid, and he did finish very good in that race too at Bahrain. But his overall best highlight, like his best actual performance, was Australia. Kind of trailed off, especially towards the middle to late part of the year. He just simply was not performing up to the levels of Fernando and trailed off. In P16, I put Nico Hulkenberg. Amazing qualifying pace. Absolutely amazing qualifying pace. But that's the only good quality he really had this year. When you actually look at the Grand Prix, he only had one single points finish, and that was at Australia where he finished P7. Or is that right? Yeah, I think that sounds right. He didn't really have many other fantastic performances. I think the rest of his points kind of came from sprint races, like Austria, I want to say. He might have had a decent result, but his actual overall performance over the course of the year is just simply not great. If Haas can show a little bit of improvement, I've heard reports that he has a contract going into next season, but I think Haas should be looking for a way out of that. I don't know if Nico is the guy. I think he's one of the most improved drivers from the year before, but granted, the year before he wasn't racing. He only did one race, so his performance that season was technically awful, and it's technically an improvement, but I still don't know if he's the right guy to be in the team. I don't think he's a bad choice for a backmarker team. I just think for a team that's trying to be competitive, he's not the guy. In P15, I put Valtteri Bottas. Now, again, he is a driver who had a little bit of bad luck, as I was saying in my 2024 predictions video. I think there was a couple certain cases, such as, off the top of my head, Singapore, where the car just died on him. He was having a decent race. I think he was P11 at that moment, or P10. I can't remember. But every now and then, Valtteri is able to get a very good performance out of their cars. And I think he's a very good, at this point, midfield driver, or at least a top-end driver for a midfield team. Then in P14, I put Daniel Ricciardo. I think it's hard to judge him, similar with Liam, simply because they didn't have too many races, and there was kind of a bit of inconsistency. Like, his first couple races, I think he was like middle of the field, and then Coda looked really bad, if I'm remembering correctly, at least in the sprint. I think he turned it around in the Grand Prix. But then, of course, he then also has a race like Mexico where he's P4 on the grid and finishing P7 and being actually competing against like cars like the McLarens, and I'm not sure if he was even like, he might have been racing like the Mercedes cars even at points too. But he looked fantastic in that race, but that was really kind of it. He doesn't really have a huge kind of resume to look for over the last year, so it's kind of hard to judge, but P14 felt kind of right in this case. In P13, I put Oscar Piastri. Now, this one's probably a little bit more questionable than others, but to me, up until the British Grand Prix, Piastri was not good. Like, I put him not down in the same category as De Vries and Sargent, but he was near the bottom of my standings up until the British Grand Prix. He turned himself absolutely around. You can see by the midseason I had him P15, and now I've got him P13, so he has been like just slowly climbing himself back up, but he did not have a good start to the year at all. Like, at all. I don't think he's bad. I think he's got a ton of potential, and once he had a competitive car, he was able to show that potential. But the entire time, I think the one thing that really brings him down is Lando absolutely destroyed him. Like, it wasn't even close, in my opinion. I'm sure there's probably some fields that show it, like, whatever levels, I don't know off the top of my head, the battles and the race battles. But Lando did so much better at almost every stage of the season. The only time I can think of that Oscar, like, genuinely was, like, outdid Lando was the Qatar Grand Prix, where he got I believe that's where he got the pole position for the sprint race. He won the sprint race, and then he finished P2 in the Grand Prix. He did fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. He's a fantastic driver, in my opinion, but that start of the season really brought him down as far as my actual analytical rankings go, and we have to look at the season as a whole. We can't just look at the final part of the season. In P12, I've put Esteban Ocon. Now, as much as you can tell, I obviously have him lower than Gasly in the standings, or at least in my power rankings. Once again, I'm going to back up. These are not standings. These are power rankings of just how the driver performed over the course of the year. Ocon, he had a little bit of bad luck this year with some... I think he had the most DNFs in the field, but like when I look back at the season as a whole, the only one really good performance I can remember from him was Monaco, where he almost stole pole position and finished on the podium. Absolutely fantastic. He got himself 15 points. The rest of the points that he has on this board, I do not remember at all. Like, Alpine are just kind of that team right now. They're kind of faded, and well, actually, right now they're going to the back of the field, so they're going to be almost more noticeable. But he just was just kind of there. Was in the middle of the pack. There wasn't really anything special about him. He finished P12 in the standings, and that's exactly where I have him also in my rankings. He just kind of fit the mold. In P11, I put Yuki Tsunoda. He had actually a fantastic year, in my opinion. Like, the year before, I was very much on the train of it's time to get rid of Yuki. He had, was it 2 seasons, I think, at that point? Yeah, because he had 2021, 22. Yeah, this was his 3rd year. So his first 2 years, he got badly outperformed by Gasly. So at that point, I was just like, get rid of him. But the way that the team happened to work out with the lineup, it gave him another chance. It gave him another chance. I don't know where I'm going with that. We're just having fun. It gave him another chance, and he proved it. He proved himself capable and absolutely deserving. I get why they only ever re-up drivers for 1 year, though, because he's going to have himself a lot more competition against Ricciardo this year than he did clearly against De Vries. But I'm excited to watch him race, and basically he still needs to prove himself year in and year out, as is the way with that AlphaTauri team. He needs to prove himself, otherwise he will be gone at the end of the year. If Ricciardo outperforms him, I don't think there's a chance that Tsunoda keeps his seat without the fact of maybe Honda stepping in and forcing Red Bull's hand. That's the only possible way I can see that taking place, but I don't know. Tsunoda, but he had himself a great year. He was great, especially that final half of the year. I think he was doing decent the first half of the year, but once Daniel came in, once Liam came in, he really stepped up his game, and I'm excited to see if that can continue into this season. In P10, I put George Russell. His first year in Mercedes, he was amazing. I considered him the more consistent, the better driver. Like, he outperformed Lewis Hamilton in that first year. Like, I wouldn't say without a doubt, but he proved himself absolutely being worthy of that seat. I'm not saying he's unworthy of being in the Mercedes seat now, but I think last year was just kind of, he was just kind of there. He was that second driver. He didn't really do much competitively. Like, I know he got himself a couple podiums. He got himself to the front row of the grid 3 times, but he wasn't really able to do anything with it for much of the year. He was just kind of scoring points consistently, which isn't bad. He finished P8 in the standings, but I think the expectations are higher for him. In P9, I put Sergio Perez. Now, this is kind of tough because obviously these are power rankings, not standings. He finished P2. This is the best season he's ever had as far as point scoring goes. As far as is it? I don't know. But as far as like finishing in the standings goes, this is the best year he's ever had. But holy crap, when Red Bull build as dominant as a car as they have, and it wasn't without a doubt that he was going to get P2, Like, there was so many races, like, it wasn't even known if he was going to compete for a podium. He struggled to get into Q3 on a regular basis. He had an awful year. I'm genuinely shocked he kept his seat, which is crazy to say for a driver finishing P2 in the standings. It's crazy to say, but it's absolutely legitimate. He had a bad year, but overall, I don't think he's deserving to lose a seat in the sport. But I'm surprised that Red Bull kept him. It's his seat absolutely to lose this year around. Because if you're finishing P9, like if you're considered like maybe the 9th, 10th best driver, meanwhile you're in the without a doubt best car on the grid, that's not good enough. That's just simply not good enough. In PA, I put Alex Albon. Now, he's probably of a little bit of the high risers as far as my standings goes, because obviously he finished how my power rankings goes, because he finished P13 in the standings, only got himself 27 points. Not a single podium, not a single fastest lap. But he proved himself a very fantastic driver in one of the worst cars on the grid. He was regularly getting performances out of where that car should not have been. And with that being the case, like, Canada's a great example. I can't remember the other race he finished P7. I want to say it was Monza. Like, granted, yes, those tracks may be ones that suit the Williams car a little bit more decently, but he still had to perform, and he clearly showed that he's the dominant one on the team, and it's absolutely perfectly understandable why some of these top teams, such as Red Bull and Mercedes, and there was rumors of Ferrari before the season, were looking at Alex Albon to fill a seat. I completely understand it. He's a great driver. I'm hopeful that he can continue that kind of performance. In P7, I put Pierre Gasly. Now, I think overall, looking at his performance, there wasn't really anything too special about it. Similar to Ocon, the difference was he was more consistent and he wasn't taking himself out of the battles ever, really. That's really the one great thing that he had going for him, is he was always there. Like, he was consistently performing week in and week out. I don't know if there was ever a time where it was just kind of like, and Pierre Gasly was the worst driver this weekend, such as almost not every other driver have, obviously, but such as most of the drivers that are not the pure top of the field have one week under another, like such as Ocon at Bahrain last year, where he got like 30 seconds in penalties. Granted, a bunch of those weren't his fault, but still, every now and then a driver has a bad performance. I don't think Gasly, off the top of my head at least, had a bad performance last season. And then to take a race with the craziness like the Dutch Grand Prix, and he turned, like, I don't know if he got out of Q1. He might have been at, like, I know he didn't get into Q3, but he turned that race into a podium for himself. He did fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Well, we already know what the second season is starting to look like with Alpine, but for his sake, I hope they get a better car, because he deserves it. He's a great driver. P6, I put Carlos Sainz. I think I've got him and Charles pretty similar in my actual ratings systems, and I know Carlos was the one who got the only win to his name. Like, that ending to the season, if we take that just into account, I think Sainz beats out Leclerc, as far as my rankings go. But that first part of the season, he was kind of a little bit invisible. He kind of brought himself back and ramped up towards the end of the year. Meanwhile, I think Charles did probably the exact opposite. But yeah, it looks like Carlos is off to a great start, at least after looking at Bahrain. I'm really excited to see what happens, and I hope he gets himself into a good team for next season. Like, I'm torn on what I want him to do, like, because I like a little bit of chaos. I know a lot of the rumors are him going to Audi or Sauber, but I think he deserves so much better than that. He deserves so much better than that. He deserves to be with a top team, absolutely. He's maybe not necessarily a world championship winning driver, but I think he's the perfect number 2, so I think he would do great. I think he would be great for Red Bull right now, because I think he would be the better option than Perez, and I don't know if Tsunoda or Ricciardo. We'll have to see how the season plays out. Are really the drivers for that second seat. I would want to see Carlos Sainz go there. Of any of the drivers right now, I would want to see Carlos Sainz or Alex Albon go there. But between the two of them, I'd prefer Carlos because we've already seen Alex Albon do that and get outperformed by Max Verstappen. As much as I don't think Carlos would bring a battle to Max, I think it would be a lot closer than it is currently. And that's really all I could ask for. In P5, I've put Charles Leclerc. Like, I covered most of it during what I was saying with Sainz. He's a great driver. He's amazing when he gets a car under him that can be competitive, but I think he still needs to prove himself a little bit more wheel to wheel, such as we saw this last weekend in Bahrain. Carlos got the edge of him, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head. No, there's just not really too much I can say. Everyone knows what we're getting out of Charles at this point. He's a fantastic driver. He might be one of the top 3 or 4 drivers on the field. But this last season, I think 5th is kind of reasonable for him. I think, well, you'll see in a minute, the drivers that I have above him did technically have better seasons than him. In P4, I put Lando Norris. Now, obviously, he's P6 in the standings. I think he, on a regular basis, outperformed the car. Even back before the upgrades got put into place, he wasn't necessarily in the points every race, but that car at that time was justifiably one of the worst on the grid. They turned it around mid-season, which is a miracle, but even when they had the bad car, he was getting decent performances out of it, and that's a big part of why I think Lando is a fantastic driver. I think if he is in a race-winning car, like a race-winning car, not necessarily a championship-winning car. I think if he's in a race-winning car, he could contend for a championship. He's that good of a driver. He's probably, again, similar to like top 4, top 5 drivers in the grid right now. It's so debatable. I think everyone has at least one guy at number 1, but the 2 through 5 for the top 5 drivers on the grid is probably extremely debatable right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are considering Lando number 2 or number 3. But at the same time, some are probably considering him like number 5 or 6. He's a great driver. I really hope McLaren can get him a competitive car at some point. Continue this path for him. In P3, I put Fernando Alonso. He had a fantastic year. Obviously, they stepped it up with their car, especially the beginning half of last year. But I think even as the car started to fall off as far as competitive performance against the field goes, I think Alonso kind of still stayed at that extreme high level where he was extremely outperforming the car, and especially what really helps his case, at least as far as my analytical standings go, he outperformed his teammate badly. So I don't know how much of that is Stroll being bad or Alonso being absolutely fantastic, but we can't ignore the fact that of everything that happened within that information. He, the beginning of last season, I predicted him P7 in the standings at the beginning of the year. He outperformed even my expectations, and I think expectations were high of him last year. So he's a fantastic driver. I would like to see him go to Mercedes next year. That, I think, would be really cool to see, because I think he is a good fit for a 1-year contract replacement with Mercedes. I don't know necessarily if they'll be a championship contending team, but his entire goal has been to get back into a top team. At this point, I think he's earned it, because I know Mercedes wants Kimi Antonelli right now, but I don't think that's the right move yet. I think it's too early for Antonelli. I think Alonso would be better to go for, even if it's on only a 1-year deal. Have him and George go up against each other while they're in the final years of their contract. Have them duke it out and see not necessarily who stays with the team, because obviously Russell is their golden boy. But yeah, I think if anyone is going to replace Lewis Hamilton right now, I think Fernando Alonso would be the best fit. In P2, I put Lewis Hamilton. Now, Obviously, for the second year in a row, he did not have a car that helped him really at all. It was justifiably throughout the season the third best car. I think for much of the season, I think Ferrari had the second best car, and then at times McLaren had the second best car. I don't think at any point in the season Mercedes had the second best car on the field. I think they were consistently third or thereabouts. Because yeah, I think at the beginning of the season actually it was probably Aston had the second best car. Then then it kind of swapped between Ferrari and McLaren. But Lewis was always getting the best out of it, getting not necessarily regular podiums. He only got 6 on the year, but he was very, very, very good on the season. The only really down part of his season, I would say, was that Qatar Grand Prix where he crashed into George. That's really it. And obviously in number 1, I've got Max Verstappen. There was never any doubts, even after just testing and the Bahrain GP last year, the championship was already decided, and I think it's going to be the same way this year, unfortunately. But last year was insane from him. Absolutely insane. In my rating system, the highest score you can get, obviously, is a 1. I think it's technically 1.06 or 1.07, something like that. But 2.42, he was consistently number 1 or number 2 in almost anything. And I have factors almost to try and raise it, but holy crap, Max was nearly perfect last year. Not perfect, obviously, but just about as close to it as you're going to get in a season. I'm scared for this year because it's hard to imagine him doing worse with how good he's looking. But at the same time, the stats, the records he broke last year, it's crazy to imagine that. I won't be too shocked if he breaks them again. It's insane. Anyways, with all of that in place, we kind of have my categories of drivers for this last year. So obviously Max was the only real championship contender. Of the drivers having a great season, I put in the category Hamilton, Alonso, Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, Gasly, and Albon. They all had great seasons, are absolutely great drivers. These are probably the drivers who, if I had to pick only 8 drivers to be in the top 4 teams, I think those would be the best drivers as of this last year. Granted, obviously that changes year to year, but those are right now the top drivers in the field right now, in my opinion. Midfield drivers right now, Perez, Russell, obviously they would be if they were in a midfield team, they would be far and away a number 1 driver. But as far as being on a top team goes right now, at least last year, they were not good. They need to do better. And then as well includes Tsunoda, Ocon, Piastri, Ricciardo, Bottas, Hulkenberg, and Stroll. So of those 2, I won't be surprised if a couple of them drop. I won't be surprised if a couple of them go up next year in my ratings. But I think these are solid positions for them in the midfield. In that improvement needed category, I had Liam Lawson and Zhou Guanyu. Granted, Liam only had a few races. It's kind of hard to judge. I'm going to completely ignore that. But to me, Zhou is absolutely on the bubble right now. If he doesn't improve this year, he should be losing his seat. The only reason I can see if he doesn't improve is because of sponsorship money at this point. It's going to be kind of hard to ignore if he keeps his seat without any sort of performance gain. Especially when you got Pourchaire right there on the edge, who's been long known as a very much hyped young driver. And Zane Maloney looks like he's off to a good start in F2, who's now part of that Sauber junior team. Zhou needs to step it up 100%. Bottas technically needs to step it up too. I think Bottas, he needs to show himself better than being just that midfield driver if he wants to stay in the sport long term at this point. And then in my bottom category, my red, who are the drivers who I think should have lost their seats, I put Magnussen, De Vries, and Sargent. Obviously, De Vries did lose his seat, in my opinion, too early, but I'm shocked Magnussen and Sargent kept their seat. Sargent, he was very, very crash happy. Granted, yes, he was a rookie, and I understand why rookies get given a second year, but as far as rookie performances go, that was bad. That was so bad. And then Magnussen, I think it's just time to move on for him. Yes, the year before was absolutely amazing, and I was so excited for him. Even I felt he was fantastic the year before, but this year just kind of proved it that maybe the first time he was let go, it was justified. So, new things I've added for this year. I've added some like award systems. I believe that's my next slide. Oh, wait, no, actually it's not. So that'll be the slide after this, I think. But if you're wanting to take a pause and take a look over all of my stats in comparison, this is what I used to come up with the ratings of each of the drivers. It's probably very small to see, but if you'd like, you can like screenshot and zoom it in, take a look around. And yeah, for most part of it, it's fairly easy to calculate. It just takes a lot of time. The AlphaTauri drivers gave me a lot of trouble because trying to make comparison against teammates is a lot difficult. It's pretty easy when there's only two teammates with each other throughout the season, but when there's one driver switching out at different parts of the year, it complicated things a little bit. So they gave me a little bit of trouble, but for the most part, most of this was pretty straightforward. And yeah, so you can take a look through that if you'd like. And then my awards for this season: Best Surprise Performance, Max Verstappen. Now, I think that one could be arguable, but simply said, like, he won 21 races, or was it 19 Grand Prix this last year? That's just insane. I think the most Lewis ever won in the years that he was winning championships was 9. And like for Verstappen to win 19 and to have broken the record of consecutive wins in a row, he deserves, like, he's the GOAT of this year. He's like the biggest surprise performance. That he was exceptional. My driver to watch for next year is Yuki Tsunoda. I think if RB or Visa, whatever they're called, do come with a better car, as they've been been rumored to have a better car for this season, I think, considering how he ended last year, I think he's the driver to watch. Best part-time driver. This is a category that normally wouldn't be there, but of those 3 drivers that were there, I think Daniel Ricciardo was the best of them. His performance in Mexico simply cannot be ignored. Like, yes, Liam had his great, fantastic race that he had at Singapore, but Ricciardo at Mexico was better. Rookie of the Year was pretty obvious. It was going to go to Oscar Piastri. Between the other 2 drivers who I could really consider, De Vries and Sergeant, who were both bad. And then for comedy, I would have included maybe Hulkenberg in that category as well, since this is his first year back. But Oscar was definitely the best out of all of those. My most improved driver, 100% was Alex Albon. His second year within Williams, granted, as much as Williams' performance improved, he also just improved that level so much for himself, to the point where he is now being considered and talked about for those top teams. Biggest disappointment of the season, Kevin Magnussen, without a doubt. Arguably within that also could be Nick De Vries. I think Nick was expected to compete for that, for that team leader position over Yuki, but Magnussen, in my opinion, was a bigger disappointment even than Nick. I would have expected more consistency out of Magnussen. I would have expected him to at least be competing for, even if it's the bottom end of points, at least be in that battle a lot more regularly, and he just was not there at all. It's disappointing to see, but I absolutely think Kevin should have lost his seat. And then now for the next slide, one thing that I'm starting to look at, if you watched I believe I had it in the F2 and F3, is I want to start looking at all of the greatest seasons of all time. Granted, I only started archiving this last year, so I've only got 2 years of information, but I'm going to look at like the top 5 drivers of each year and put them in this like top 10 list, and I'll probably try and update it each season. So right now we've only got 10 drivers in there, so of those top 10 drives of the last 2 years, obviously Max Verstappen is number 1 and number 2. I've got, from this year, I've got Lewis Hamilton at number 3, Fernando Alonso at number 4, and Lando Norris at number 7. Oh, and Charles at number 8. So yeah, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, so yeah. Obviously this will get updated each year. Max Verstappen will probably have number 1, 2, and 3 by the end of it. By the end of this next season. But I'm excited to try and go over this so we can look at year to year which drivers have the best performance whenever they're winning those championships. Such as, for example, when I compared the F2 seasons, when you look at the actual truly most dominant F2 winning season, it wasn't Charles Leclerc or George Russell as gets talked about all the time. It was far and away Nick de Vries in 2019 had the most dominant F2 win, but granted that was his third year, so I know it kind of gets discounted a little bit. But yeah, it's something I want to kind of go ahead and look at. Anyways, that kind of finishes off this video. This was an extremely long one. My voice is very dry. I'm going to go and get myself some water. Let me know what you think of my rankings. Who would you have put higher? Who would you have put lower? What do you think is going to happen this year? And I know we've already seen Bahrain, but let me know. I'm very excited to read your comments. And please, if you can, just go give me a follow on the socials down below. Join me on Twitch. I would love to interact and talk with people. Have a great day. Take care.